Welcome to Beyond the Fundamentals. In this video, we want to talk about signal versus noise discernment. Signal versus noise discernment. When you're listening to something, how do you separate the signal from the noise? Okay. As we get started, thanks to everybody who contributes to the channel. We can't do this for free, and we appreciate everyone who contributes. I'm having a difficult time putting work aside to find time to do these things, and those of you who contribute make that possible. So I really appreciate those of you who do this to make this possible. So signal versus noise discernment. What I want to do as we get started is look at, I'm going to use a whiteboard today on an iPad, and a lot of us tend to think of things in terms of white and black. And I know that some of you think that, the Antichrist's job is to blur the lines, and not everything is white and black because we have truth. So white and black. But the problem is that not everything comes in white and black because we are complicated creatures. Everything that you hear or learn, and I know we believe the Bible's the inspired word of God, so that is true, right? But we have to interpret it, okay? And who does the interpreting? Flawed humans, okay? So everything that we hear or learn comes from these human beings that are complicated messes that have human nature, and there is good and bad, or correct and incorrect in all of us. And so you can't just listen to any single human and get things that are all good or things that are all bad. There's nothing that is just black and white. When I was a kid, I used to, my dad sometimes would be listening to preaching on TV before we'd go to church. And I would ask the question, is this guy telling the truth or is he a liar, or is he a good preacher or a bad preacher? I'd ask some kind of question like that. And my dad would say, well, he's on the money, he's telling the truth. This guy's, got it. Or no, this guy's messed up in a few places. And in my mind, that the people were either all good or all bad. There was no in between. And it seems that this kind of thinking gets perpetuated, and I'm going to try to cover a few things that maybe will help us to discern truth from error when it comes to some of this stuff, which is really signal from, I want you to think in terms of signal from noise, not so much in truth from error. So something happens. I've been studying psychology a lot since probably I was about 39, and that means I haven't been doing it for very long. I've been doing it for a little over 2 years. And what I found I came across borderline personality disorder. And what I found out when you study borderline personality disorder is that something happens during one of the stages of infant development. So you have a little baby over here, okay? And he's growing a little bit. Anyway, there's one stage of infant development where if you take the mother away from the child, and say the mother drops off the child at daycare and the mother goes away. Don't say anything about my drawing, by the way. If the mother is there, the mother exists. And if the mother is not there, the mother does not exist. There is no more mother. And that is completely devastating to the infant. They just think the person's gone. They have no concept of a thing existing outside of their purview of sight, okay? So it's either there or not, and it's based on whether they can see it or not, and this leads to something called splitting, okay? Now this comes up later, whereas things are either all good or all bad. They will characterize a person as completely good or completely bad. So if they characterize them as completely good, when that person does some not so good things, they will whitewash them and put them on a pedestal and make excuses for them. When they characterize a person as completely bad, there's absolutely nothing good that person can do that will redeem them in the eyes of this person who's done the splitting. It's either all good or all bad. And what I learned as I'm learning this, I learned that it seems to me that some versions of fundamentalist Christianity create this kind of splitting on purpose, which is not good, which I don't recommend. So I remember when I was a kid, I used to think of, I was taught what was good and bad. You shouldn't grow your hair out long. You shouldn't say any cuss words. You shouldn't smoke or drink or anything like that. So in my head, if I was out and about grocery store parties, or any kind of gathering, like my dad had to go to some work functions where there were gatherings there. If I saw a person with a beer, that person was all bad to me. If I saw them smoking, they were all bad. If I heard them say a cuss word, that person was just all bad to me. There's no redeeming them. It was like, that's a bad person. I remember my brother and I sitting in a car in a parking lot watching people, you're doing people watching. And we're little kids at the time. And we were determining whether or not people were saved or lost based on their haircut. And so the guy was, and other things too. He's smoking, he must be lost. Or he's got long hair, he must be lost. And that's the kind of thinking that we had. Now, it's splitting. All good, all bad. All black, all white, no in between. There's no such thing as a guy who is a very decent person, a good citizen, takes care of his family, but maybe has a beer on Friday nights, okay? No such thing as a person like that. I mean, once he has the beer, everything else is gone. Now, what that creates all kinds of problems. If a person is addicted to something, say they can't stop smoking, or they can't stop looking at porn, or they can't stop drinking, or whatever, if they go over a little bit, like say they have one cigarette, or they see one scantily clad magazine picture, or something like that, if they go over a little bit and sense any kind of enjoyment, then they just go ahead and binge on it because the line has been crossed. There is no gray area. There's no difference between taking a sip of a beer versus going on a bender for 3 days, okay? So that's not good for that reason. Now, I'm not trying to talk about all that kind of stuff, but I'm trying to give you an idea that a little bit of a not so good thing is not the same as a whole bunch of a not so good thing. And those things are different. We need to recognize them as different. We need to see them as different. But what we're dealing with is the information ecology. Information ecology. Now, my handwriting is not awesome, so don't be distracted by it. Information ecology. When you say something, you can either increase the quality of the information commons, the information ecology in which everybody else has to operate, or you can decrease the quality of the information commons and the information ecology in which everybody else has to operate. And what you want to do is you want to be the kind of person that never tells a lie. Always tell the truth, just like Jordan Peterson says. Always tell the truth, or at least try not to lie. Okay? Don't say things for which you don't have a proper level of epistemic warranty to say. Okay? Don't say things with a degree of certainty. And that's one of the things I'm going to use that phrase several times in this video. It's so, well, we'll get to that. But what we're looking at is the level of certainty that people have when they talk, and whether the level of certainty that they have is warranted epistemically. In other words, have they put enough have they done enough research into whatever it is they're talking about to actually be familiar with the data and support the level of certainty that they have? When it comes to politics, religion, or feelings on certain political issues, you'll notice that people with the highest degree of rage and outrage and the highest degree of support tend to have the smallest epistemic warranty for the level of certainty that they are raging about. Okay? It's like the unread library effect, or the parroting effect. They're repeating somebody else. They firmly and fervently believe in something, and they're saying things with degrees of certainty that aren't warranted by the level of epistemic effort that they've put into it. Okay? You don't want to be that guy. If you don't have, enough epistemic effort to warrant a certain degree of certainty, then don't have that degree of certainty about a thing. That's why even when it comes to the Bible, like I have to say things like, I don't know who or what God is for sure. I know what the Bible says about it, and I know that I'm operating on the axioms that the Bible is true and that it came from God, who or whatever God is. So I understand that, and what that does, if I understand my axioms, it stops me from speaking with a degree of certainty that is unwarranted by my experiences or by what I've studied. So I can state things in terms of my axioms rather than in terms of absolute truth. So it gives people, it prevents me from being blacked and whited unnecessarily. Okay. Now I want to talk about when people talk. When people talk, I'm going to clear the page here, and I'm going to draw a little person. Now what I should do is get my daughter, who's about to be 16, to do this for me. I don't like that. I'm going to make some better hair. I don't like that either. All right. So you have a person here. I'm making it female because it's fun to draw hair. And out of the mouth, they say things. So there's bleh, they vomit stuff. They say stuff, or they communicate stuff. They write something. They're communicating somehow. And when that person communicates, that is what we're going to call, for the purposes of this discussion, a broadcast. Okay? And a broadcast is one-to-many. It's one person speaking, one person putting out information. Could be on TV, could be in person to a crowd, could be in a letter, could be in a writing, could be in a newspaper calling. But they're broadcasting something. They're saying something, and a broad audience is taking it in. Maybe not a broad audience. Maybe it's just you taking it in, but it's a one-way communication. And we're going to put some limits on this broadcast, and here's some left and right limits over here. Now, ideally what you want to do is you would like to be able to separate what they say. Here's some noise over here, and then here's some signal over here. And ideally what you want to be able to do is to very clearly separate the signal from the noise. I'm looking around me. I wanted to have a prop. I don't have a prop. I can use this as a prop. I have this box here. This box is a packaging for something. It's a packaging for Kendra Scott. And something came in this box. I don't know what came in this box, but let's see. Let's put something in the box. I'm going to take this computer mouse here. I better turn it off. Take this computer mouse here, and we're going to say that the computer mouse comes in the box. And let's say that's how you buy it, okay? Now, when you buy the computer mouse, it comes in packaging. And you know easily that when I get home, I'm gonna open up the packaging, and I'm going to take out the product, and I'm going to separate it from the packaging, okay? But you know that the product comes in the packaging, and that's how it's packaged at the store, and that's how you buy it. So when I get home now, it's very easy for me to tell what the packaging is doing, and that the packaging is not the product, and I just want the product. And then when I get the product out of the packaging, I might throw the packaging away, or I might use it for something completely different. Like as in this case, this packaging has been repurposed, so maybe we can stick a small Christmas present in it or something like that. But once that happens, these two items are separate now. They came together, but they now have separate purposes and separate destinations. They're going to be used for different things. So they're no longer correlated in my mind. Now I have an empty box, and the relevance of it depends totally now on what I want to do with it. It used to be relevant because the thing that I wanted was inside it, and that's the only thing that made it relevant. And now that I've separated them, its relevance will completely change based on whatever use I can now find for this, and this relevance remains the original reason that I got this device, is so that I can continue doing whatever I wanted to do with it. Now, when somebody speaks, there is some signal in there packaged in noise. But the problem is, you don't know the difference. You don't know what's the packaging and what's the product. All right? And one of the reasons you don't know that is because, you didn't go to the store looking for it and trying to buy it. Okay? Somebody's telling you something they think you need to know, kind of like in what's happening right here. I'm trying to tell you something I think you need to know, and you don't even know what the product is yet till I finish talking, and then you get to determine how much is packaging, how much is product. All right? So when somebody talks, discernment is the art of learning how to separate the product from the packaging. So when you separate the signal from the noise, it's separating the product from the packaging. and then the packaging might be repurposed and be able to be used for something else. So there might not be as much waste as you think there is when it's all said and done. Okay? So within noise, you can have things, if you're looking at the screen here, you can have things that are wrong. You can have things that are error. You can have things that are just irrelevant. Now, this is irrelevant to the purpose of this once they're separated, but it might gain relevance elsewhere. So the same thing might happen with a broadcast. When somebody's broadcasting a message to you, they may say some stuff that, based on the purpose of the talk or based on your purpose for listening, some of what they're saying may be noise or irrelevant, but based on something else, it could gain some relevance. It could become relevant later. Now, in signal, there's mainly two things I want to focus on, and one is propositional truths. Yeah, I don't want that to be confusing. Propositional truths. And these are simple statements of true things, okay? And then you could have insights. Now, there are other things that could be in signal, but these are the two that I want to talk about. Not innights, but insights, okay? Insights. And I'm not even sure if I'm spelling that right. If you look up the definition of insight, I think the first definition that pops up is the capacity to gain an accurate and deep intuitive understanding of a person or thing. Now, I want to give you a different definition, and the different definition of an insight would be a capacity for a rapid increase in cognitive fluency. It could be a rapid increase in cognitive fluency, or it could be something which allows a rapid increase in cognitive fluency. If you've ever done the 9-dot problem, do the 9-dot problem sometime. And that's where the phrase thinking outside the box comes from. It comes from the 9-dot problem. And an insight is when someone shows you how to think outside the box on the 9-dot problem. That is the insight which makes it possible. An insight is not just a truth. It's not just a set of truths. It is something which gives you the capacity to discover truths. It is a meta truth, if you will. For example, if I just tell you a true thing, or a true thing out of Scripture, for example, if I just tell you a true thing, by the way, I didn't start off with Scripture. I have one in mind, and I don't really have a script for this, but the Scripture I want to go to be thinking about these things is Hebrews chapter 5. And at the end of Hebrews chapter 5, now I kind of have all my stuff over here. It's kind of a mess because it's not really a good way to have it on this little table. At the end of Hebrews chapter 5, you have, that is not the end of Hebrews 5. There we go. That was the end of Hebrews 6. 5:12, Hebrews 5:12, for when the time you ought to be teachers, ye have need one that one teach you again, which be the first principles of the oracles of God, and are become such as have need of milk and not of strong meat. Okay? Someone who's giving you milk is giving you a bare bones list of simple propositional truths. Okay? You're not having to process a lot of data. You're not having to do a lot of discernment. You're not having to separate signal from noise. They're just giving you some basic things, okay? And then from there, everyone that useth milk is unskillful in the word of righteousness, for he is a babe. So it is possible to become skillful in the word of righteousness. We want to increase our skill. There's a skill level component here, so you have to exercise this. Strong meat belongeth to them that are of full age, even those who by reason of use have exercised their senses both to discern good and evil. Now we're going to use this word discernment, and we're talking about signal and noise instead of good and evil. Now it also applies to good and evil, obviously. But now what I want to do is go to Ephesians 4:16, and I hope that you are familiar with us having covered Ephesians 4:16 in several previous videos. From whom okay, this is the model where everybody in Ephesians 4, basically 13 through 16, this is the model where every joint is supplying the edification. It's no longer just the pastors and teachers and evangelists and apostles and prophets. It is everybody lottie-dottie. Every joint is supplying the edification, making the increase to the body the edifying of itself in love. Now, in order for that to happen, you have to have, like, instead of a broadcast mentality where you have one person talking to many people, you have to have a mesh network topology where every joint is transmitting and receiving, but also processing properly. And processing, separating signal from noise, synthesizing and extracting a greater amount of truth from the broadcast than what was originally put there. So there's also an amplification of the signal at the same time. So imagine if you're trying to boost your Wi-Fi signal, but there's a lot of noise in the Wi-Fi signal. And when we say noise, like you're listening to a broadcast, like say you're listening to AM radio and you hear the guy talking, but there's also all that in the background. Well, you kind of tune out the fuzz, that's noise, and you hone in on the guy's voice talking because you can hear them both and you're trying to separate them. And so if you're trying to boost your Wi-Fi signal, there's electronic noise, if you will, in the signal. And imagine you can plug in a booster which reduces the fuzz and the noise in the electronic signal and boosts the signal itself so that you have a cleaner, stronger signal. That's what every node in the network should be doing with all the transmissions that we utter to each other. Okay, so in order for so there's an implied task in Ephesians 4:16. In order for every joint to be able to supply edification, what that means is that every joint also needs to be able to process data in a way that allows them to discern signal from noise. Okay, and extract signal from noise sometimes, and I'll give you an example of how that can be done in a couple of minutes. So insights. Let me go back to our little drawing here. An insight is a rapid increase in cognitive fluency. It is not just a statement of truth. It is something that can give you a lot of truth. For example, when you learn the inductive method of interpreting Scripture, that is a method that can help you observe what Scripture says. It gives you tools to do this, and it helps you eliminate things that you think that Scripture doesn't say. It helps you eliminate your presuppositions. So it is very insightful. And notice if you take the four kinds of knowing, participatory knowing, the perspectival knowing, procedural knowing, and propositional knowing, the inductive method is actually a procedure. So that's procedural knowing. It's at a different level of knowing. It's a procedure which generates a whole bunch of good propositions and eliminates a whole bunch of bad propositions. So it's very insightful because it does that, okay? The Tereo methodology that we've talked about before, when we talked about how we're going to do away with dispensational theology and replace it with the Tereo method, okay? That method is a process. It's not a set of doctrines. It's not a set of propositions that you're supposed to believe. It's a process that you do at the procedural level, and you participate in it. So it's in the participatory level, and it requires, having the view from above and all that. So it incorporates all four kinds of knowing in order to produce propositions and eliminate bad propositions. So it is insightful in that way. So a process can be insightful because it generates a whole bunch of good propositions and eliminates a whole bunch of bad ones. Sometimes a single truth can be insightful because it is the missing piece which allows you to synthesize a whole bunch of other truths into a bigger picture, and you were just missing the thing that tied them all together before. So sometimes an insight can be like that. Sometimes an insight will be a truth that cascades down, okay? And that can be bad sometimes. If you've never played Minesweeper, that's an example of how I envision a single insightful propositional truth cascading down. Sometimes when you're playing Minesweeper, if you don't know what that game is, you get a bunch of little gray squares that all look the same. They're all the same size and everything. And under some of them are little bombs, and under some of them are nothing, and under some of them are little numbers telling you how many bombs are touching it. And it's a little game where you try not to touch any bombs. And sometimes if you hit an open area, a whole bunch of space will open up all at one time. And that's kind of how I envision an insight happening. One little thing, you just click on one little box, one little thing that can really open up a whole new world, a whole new area of information, maybe in a whole new domain of thought, something you didn't know before, something that really causes all the other things you were struggling with to kind of fall into place and start to make sense. Now, this can be bad too, okay? How can it be bad? Well, we deal with Calvinism on this channel. We expose the errors of Calvinism on this channel. And you might call this an opposite of an insight. All of the entire Calvinistic system, everything that is distinctive of Calvinism, cascaded down from the presumption, taking Pelagius's presumption of the human free will. Well, Augustine built a series of doctrines. He built an entire doctrine based on one presumption, that there is no human free will. That's the presumption that he had. Now, both of them had the wrong presumption, because the error is to start with any presumption about human free will. That's the problem. So both of them had false cascades of it. Now, once you presume that about free will, once you make a presumption, there are a whole bunch of things that cascade down from that. And that's what Calvinism is. It is the things that necessarily must cascade down from that presumption. Treat it as if it's an insight. If that's true, then all these other things must also be true. They have to be. That's what Calvinism is. That's how Calvinism developed. You might call it an anti-insight. An anti-insight. A non-insight. But a good insight cascades truths out from it. Things that are useful and helpful and true and benefit. Now, here's the problem. What do you want? You want insights and you want truths. And you might think of insight as something this big and a truth is something this big. Insight is a small little thing, but it's hugely helpful, okay? The problem is this, and I hope you can see this, but these little insights, see how small this is in my drawing? These little insights and truths over here that I'm circling? These little insights and truths come packaged in all this. That's how they come packaged, okay? And in order to get the insights and truths, you have to take the whole thing. You have to take the whole thing. Now, what I want to happen is, in order to get the insights and truths, what people need to share is their perspective. When somebody talks in the Ephesians 4:16 model, they are not trying to tell you a truth about which they have a high degree of certainty. They are trying to share a perspective with an unknown degree of certainty. Do you understand the difference? And that's the same thing I'm trying to do on this channel. What I'm trying to do is show you a perspective. I'm just trying to share my perspective. And you and I both understand that everything that I'm saying could potentially be wrong. So I am asking you in advance not to believe what I say, but to consider it and process it. And maybe on the other side of processing it, we both walk away with something better than what we started with. Okay? So we're sharing perspectives. We're not teaching truths. Okay? Now we can teach truths. Now what's the difference between sharing perspectives and teaching truths? If I'm teaching truths, I have a high degree of certainty that is epistemically warranted if I'm teaching truth properly. Now, a false teacher is teaching falsehoods with a high degree of certainty that is not epistemically warranted. Okay? And that's the difference between the two. So you need to understand the difference between a teacher and a perspective sharer, okay? A perspective sharer, somebody who's sharing their perspective for the consumption of the mesh network topology group, that is not somebody who is a false teacher who needs to be corrected. That is somebody who is making a contribution to the distributed cognition process. And we thank them for that, because in what they say is potential truth and insight, but we have to process it to separate the signal from the noise to get the truth and the insight. Okay? So what I need their whole broadcast. I need that broadcast. Okay? And I also know that when I get that broadcast, I'm getting a bunch of stuff that is going to be wrong or in error or irrelevant or stuff like that. And they know that too, you see? So a person who has a high degree of certainty but is not epistemically warranted cannot participate in this process. That is the kind of person that we would need to say, thank you for playing, but Mario is not in this castle, okay? Have a nice day. Maybe go over here in this other group where you're getting milk for a little while before you can come over here and participate where we're trying to share the meaty side. Okay. So there's something else that has to happen too is, and I noticed this one of our Wednesday nights, is understanding. I said in one of the things that I feel like I'm getting defensive, and what was happening is that I didn't necessarily want somebody else to agree with what I was saying, because I think we were talking about remission and redemption, stuff like that. I didn't necessarily want the other people to agree with what I was saying, but I wanted them to understand what I was saying. Now that's important too. And we don't want to confuse the desire to be understood with the desire to have someone believe you. Now, what I want to accomplish between you and me, and when we do our Wednesday night stuff and things like that, and write back and forth in emails, I want us to understand each other. So if you catch me clarifying what I'm saying, I probably perceive that you are not understanding what I'm saying. It's not that you agree or disagree, but if you disagree, you might be disagreeing with something that I'm not trying to say. So it's first clear that you understand what I'm saying. Then if you still disagree, fine. That's fine. It's great. Wonderful. I just want to make sure that you correctly understand that with which you're trying to disagree. So we need to understand that too. And if we kind of go back and forth a little bit, we want to understand each other. Now, here's what I want to do. Somebody wrote me in a private message the other day, and they said, yeah, but insights aren't errors. Okay? Yeah, I know that. But here's the problem. I cannot get the insights without the broadcast, which contains errors. And what I need in order to get the insights is I need broadcast. Now, I could get 10 broadcasts from somebody, and 8 of them have no truth or signal in them. But of the 2, some of those have some truth and insights in them, and I can get those down. But what I need to get those 2 truths or insights, I need all 10 broadcasts. Here's what I need. I need this person up here. Now they're participating in a mesh network topology. So when they speak over here to the right, there are people, and I hope you can see these little dots that I'm making. There are several people, and they're all connected to each other, okay? And they're all transmitting and receiving back and forth, okay? So everything that gets spoken goes to, the N+1, all these different, whatever that law is. There's a law that describes how this works. But all these different things go all these different directions. And you have that N times N+1 number of communications back and forth. And when she speaks, the mesh network topology of every other joint in the local, body, they start to process the broadcast. They're separating the truth from the noise. They're taking the noise away. They're honing in on the signal. And I mean signal and noise, what I meant to say a second ago. They're honing in on the signal, and they're amplifying the signal. Now, when somebody's wrong, they could be wrong for a couple of reasons. They could be wrong because they don't understand what they're talking about. And I'm not saying that to be mean. I'm just saying that they're trying to express a perspective, but they don't have an optimal grip on the thing they're talking about. And that's not bad, okay? I still need that perspective, and they need to share it so that we can share things back with them. Or they might not be skilled at articulating. Now, one of the things I noticed when I realized Calvinism was wrong, because I was a Calvinist for about a year, one of the things I noticed was that immediately, as soon as I realized how wrong it was, I had this overwhelming sensation of not being up to the task of correctly articulating the nature of the wrongness of it, so that other people could feel what I'm feeling and see the wrongness that I'm seeing. And ever since then, I've been trying to turn the skill level up on articulating specifically that thing. I want people to fully grasp what I saw perspectively, conceptually. I have this visual image in my head of this Calvinist situation. I want other people to share that. And there could be other reasons too, but when they're saying something wrong, it could be that they don't understand or have a good optimal grip on the thing they're trying to talk about, but they're still trying to share their perspective. And even if somebody is talking that way, the awareness of the perspective is still helpful to other people who are processing data. So you might find that there's a lot less noise than what you really think there is. Okay? And then they might not be good at articulating, and they might be saying things wrong just because they're just not good at articulating, not skilled at it. So what they say, see, propositional knowledge already falls very short. It's already data compression. And to add to that, the fact that people aren't skilled at semantically conveying an idea just complicates the problem. It complicates it even further. So of all the things that we put here, I'm gonna blank this screen out here in just a minute. But of all the things that we put here, we have a person that's making a broadcast, and that is the packaging that contains all the stuff. And they may not understand, but they're still sharing their perspective. And they know, and they may know this. See, in order to participate in this, you have to know that you may not understand it. And that's why you're not saying with the intent to persuade. You're saying the stuff with the intent to submit it for processing to the rest of the group, so that everybody acting as a transmitter and a processor can take that broadcast and then they spit it back out in this crystallized form. That, ta-da, now I have this wonderful new truth that is better articulated, and now I have a better understanding of what it was I was trying to talk about. That's the reason to tell, like on Wednesday nights, that's the reason to say things on our Wednesday night Zoom sessions. It's not to persuade anybody else of what we think, but to submit it for processing to the group so that it can be refined and made better. That's what we want to happen. Now, and then you have perspective. They're just sharing a perspective. They're not speaking as if they're trying to tell you an absolute truth. They're trying to tell you how they perceive the truth or what they think is true. And then there's the goal is to try to get people to understand your perspective, not necessarily believe it. And then if you disagree, you understand what you're disagreeing with. Or if you have something to add, you know what you're adding to, and it's not different. Now, I'm going to blank this out, and I already did a screenshot of it. But what I want you, before I blank it out, here's what needs to happen. We have to respond to the broadcast in a way that keeps people comfortable participating by offering their broadcast, by broadcasting their perspective. We want people to keep broadcasting their perspective. So when Sally over here, and this could be a man or a woman, doesn't matter. When Joe Schmo over here, or like in the military, Private Schmedlack, when Private Schmedlack says what he has to say, and 90% of it is error, okay? I'm going to clear the page. 90% of it is error. Depending on how you respond to it, you could do something to Private Schmedlack which makes him not want to share his perspective anymore. You see? So while we're doing all this, we have to realize that we are dealing with human beings. So when I come to sharing my perspective, there's a possibility to have anxiety, to be embarrassed, to be stigmatized. So what you need is psychological safety. You need a psychological safety. You need a place that's psychologically safe to where you can say stupid things, unarticulate things, cringeworthy things without other people responding back to you in a way that's going to provoke anxiety or embarrass you or stigmatize you or shame you or guilt you or make you feel stupid. Or I'll just write that down, feel stupid. How many people have felt stupid? I have felt stupid before. Just recently, I felt stupid. We don't want people to feel stupid. So if when people share their stupid stuff, when people share their noisy perspective, where it's not articulated well and they don't understand the subject well, when they share that, our response to that should be one of gratitude and thanks, because tucked away in that inarticulate misunderstanding of something they think they perceive, tucked away in there is some truth and insight that if I process it correctly, I can extract out. So what I need this person to do, what I need all the people to do is to continue offering their perspective, right? And I don't want to treat them in such a way to where they become unwilling to offer their perspective. Now, people have different temperaments. I come from a military background, and in the military, you grow thick skin. And there's a little bit of forced ego transcendence, if you will, to where you can't get your feelings hurt when somebody tells you your plan is all jacked up and you go back to the drawing board. You just go back to the drawing board. You suck it up and you drive on. You just do it. Now, not everybody's like that. You would say, well, they should, but they're not. Okay? So that's why in 2 Timothy 2, with meekness, you're helping other people with gentleness, and because we want to continue to coax out of them their shared perspective. So when they give you their perspective, and it's very noisy, we don't want to, like what happened recently. Somebody was trying to, this person said something wrong and they needed to be corrected. You said this, and you play the tape back, it says this, and it should have been this. That might be technically true, but if you treat people that way, you are going to turn off the spigot of them sharing anything at all. And we don't want that to happen. Okay? We don't want that to happen. We don't want the people to be embarrassed or stigmatized or called out in public for how wrong or error they were. We're not in the business of trying to call people out. And one of the things that happened, we have Wednesday night Zoom sessions where people need to be allowed to say things based on their perspective that may have a lot of noise in it. And so if that is the platform, and like when you're at your church, okay, the place where that stuff is shared is also the place where it needs to be processed, okay? So in that Zoom session or in that little discussion you have at your church, if somebody says something that's extra noisy, let the processing happen there. What happened in this case was somebody went out to made a public comment that everybody can see in a chat, calling somebody out by name, saying they needed to be corrected. Okay. That's a different platform. It's a different arena, and it's a different feeling, and you don't get to capture the tone correctly. And it might have been the nicest thing, the nicest intent in the world, but it's not going to come across the same. So when the noise is emitted, the processing and response to the noise needs to take place in the same arena that it was emitted to reduce, you don't want it following them around elsewhere to other platforms. Hey, I'm over here trying to listen to this other Sunday morning thing over here, and somebody's calling me out in the comment section. Nobody wants that, okay? That's embarrassing. It's stigmatizing. It's shaming. And what that's going to do, it's going to produce people who no longer want to share. But not just the person. See, not just the person that's targeted, but people from the outside. They also see that, hey, this group is targeting people and calling them out. So I don't want to go to those Zoom meetings if that's going to happen to me. And I don't want to open my mouth and say anything if that's going to happen to me. They don't want that to happen. And so I'm trying to use a real world example of how this needs to work, okay? So when somebody says something that's noisy, we want them to keep saying things that are noisy, because we're going to take that noisy stuff and we're going to make something out of it. We're going to process it, and then all together, we're all going to edify every joint, edifying each other joint, all the other joints. And we're going to edify ourselves into something that's more than what we were when we started as a group together, okay? But we need to do it in a place that has psychological safety, that doesn't produce anxiety or embarrassment. And if you're talking to somebody, you don't realize that maybe how you're coming across is producing embarrassment and anxiety and stigmatization in other people, that's something maybe you need to know, okay? And it's maybe something I need to know. Maybe I do that to people and I don't know it. But that's the goal. That's what we're striving for, is to have this kind of environment where people can do this. I'm going to give you an example of how this might look in the military. I'm going to try to draw a couple things here that maybe you'll see. So in the military, let's say you send out a reconnaissance team to do a reconnoiter, okay? And a reconnaissance is where you go out and you try to observe the enemy so that you get a good idea of what you're up against, okay? You want the enemy basically like a salute report. You want the size, activity, location, the uniform, what time it was, and what equipment they had, the acronym for salute, okay? And that's a bare bones reconnaissance report, is what we call a salute report. Now, usually that's extemporaneous. It's not for an intentional reconnaissance, but an extemporaneous reconnaissance where you just happen to encounter them from a distance and you want to give a salute report. But let's say you got, say, 7 people out there conducting a reconnaissance. Now, when you're doing a reconnaissance, you don't want the enemy to spot you. So you have to hide and do it, okay? So let's say one of our guys is between 2 jagged rocks or something, and he doesn't have a lot of perspective. He can't go up and down a whole lot. He can't come down, and he sees an airplane wing, okay, sticking out. And that's all he can see. He can't get too far to the left, too far to the right. He just sees an airplane wing. Somebody else, they're looking and they see like a little ship mast popping up somewhere else from a different angle, different perspective, okay? And they go back to headquarters. Now there's 5 other people too. They go back to headquarters, and one guy says, you know what? I saw an airplane wing. The enemy is going to attack us from the air. They're going to get us with an airborne attack somehow, okay? Got planes over there. And then the other person said, well, I saw a boat mast. They're probably going to come from the water. That's probably how they're coming, because I saw the boat mast over there. And I know what a ship mast looks like, and that was a ship mast, right? Well, the other 5 people see different things. They see cables running on the ground. They see different things. And pretty soon, somebody finds out that this was not an airplane wing, and this was not a ship mast, but this was a satellite dish with a little beacon. You know how satellite dishes have them. A little beacon pointing out of the top, the front of the satellite dish. And this is not going to be an airplane attack or a boat attack. This is a communications relay station. And they're able to aggregate that. Now, here's the deal. They would not be able to aggregate that without the guy talking about the airplane wing and without the other person talking about the ship mast. And somebody was able to backwards analyze what was said and extract a greater truth out of it by synthesizing it with other information. So I need the guy who talked about the airplane wing. I needed that part of the report. I need it. And the person who talked about the ship mast, I need that part of the report. because I used that to synthesize something completely different than what they thought they were seeing, but I still needed them to say what they thought they saw. Okay? Are you getting me? So I'm getting their perspective, and their perspective is not complete, but it's still valuable. So if we were to go back to our other picture, which I've already erased by now, but if we were to go back to our other picture, we would see that what they said was technically noise and technically error, but I can still use it. I can aggregate it and put it together and synthesize greater truth out of it. Even though what they said was propositionally wrong, I can take that proposition at propositional knowing, and then I can go up to procedural knowing, put those propositions into a procedure of data processing in the mesh network topology, and that procedural knowing, can spit back out true propositions. You understand? So I'm incorporating two different kinds of knowing here. Propositional, perspectival knowing, three different kinds. Perspectival knowing, what's your perspective of what you saw and how that's incomplete, and I need more than one perspective to put the whole thing together. And the propositional statements that it's an airplane and a ship mast, those are both wrong, but they're propositions. So I can take the perspectives, the propositions, and put those through a process. And I process that data through the mesh network topology, reducing the noise, and I'm even going to modify some of what was said, and I can actually turn some of the noise into signal by synthesizing it in the data processing process. And so what was an airplane wing now turns out to be the side of a satellite dish that was sticking out that looked like an airplane wing from his perspective, you see? And what looked like a ship mast actually turns out to be the beacon on a satellite dish, not a ship mast. But I still needed those people to say those things in order to be able to synthesize the greater truth that came as a result. Now, next time Private Schmedlack goes out there, maybe next time he will say, "Oh, I was wrong about it being an airplane wing." So what are we gonna tell these people? We're not going to say you're wrong. That was not an airplane wing. That was a satellite dish. We're not going to treat them that way. What we're going to say to those people is say, Private Schmedlack, your reconnaissance, what you provided, helped us determine what was going on. Thank you for your service. Thank you for sharing your perspective, because it was part of a greater whole which enabled us to know what was going on at the enemy base camp. That's how we treat the people that deliver noisy broadcasts, because if we process it correctly, we can get signal out of a noisy broadcast if we process it right. So now maybe Private Schmedlack is going to go back. And by the way, military people, there's a disagreement over whether it's Schmedlack or Schmedlap, okay? And the first way I ever heard it was Schmedlack, and I like that person better than the first person that I ever heard Schmedlap from. So that's why I say Schmedlack. Just so you know, because I know some of you out there, some of you want me to say Schmedlap, and I'm not saying it. I'm saying Schmedlack. And now I'm going to forget how to pronounce it because I said it too many times now. But when Private Schmedlack goes out there next time, he's going to say, well, maybe instead of presuming that it's an airplane wing, because that is deduction, he's deducting things without realizing what his presumptions are. So maybe instead of presuming that I'm looking at an airplane wing, maybe I just describe what I actually see. Maybe I see something that looks like an oval-shaped piece of metal sticking out from the side of a cliff, which to me resembles an airplane wing. Maybe next time I'll say that. So now, because of being exposed to the information processing process, Private Schmedlack now has a higher level of skill at articulating his perspective than he did before. So every time he does that, his skill level at articulating the truth goes up a little bit. And his ability for his propositional statements coming out of his mouth to match what his perspective actually is, so it gets higher and higher fidelity. So some people, they have a perspective, and their actual perspective might be pretty good, but their ability to articulate it is bad, and it might not even match. They might be so bad at articulating that what they're saying doesn't even match their own perspective just due to a lack of skill to articulate. All right? So by helping each other out, we increase procedural knowing of how to articulate things that we perceive too. Hope you're tracking on all this. So, what did we learn? We learned about broadcasts and how they come in. That is how things are packaged. And the insights that we get are packaged in broadcasts. And those broadcasts contain a lot of noise. So the insights and the truths and the signal. We'll say the insights. I'll put the word signal over here. The signal, insights, signal, the truth, and propositional truths, they come packaged in noisy broadcasts. And we need to treat people in such a way that they keep giving us their noisy broadcasts. And as we do that, their capacity and skill to articulate at a higher level of resolution will increase. And we will all gain insights, and we want them to continue sharing. Now, something I forgot to talk about, I was trying to wrap it up here, but I forgot to talk about this, and I really want to talk about this. It's real quick, but I want to talk about resolution. And we have different degrees of resolution and thumbnails, okay? Thumbnail. What's a thumbnail? When you have an image, say you're looking on the internet and there's a little icon of an image. If you click on that image, it will give you the big picture of the image. But the thumbnail version is the little one that you click on before you see the big one. Now I have this on my website. On my website, on the charts and images page, if you go to there, you'll see little thumbnail images of like a Bible chart, a chart about the Bible. And when you click on it, it'll pop up and show you a high resolution image. Now, if you were to make the screen bigger, just zoom in on the web page where the thumbnail image is, it would be very pixelated and it would not be a very clear image of what is seen. Okay? So when people talk, it's in low resolution. Our concepts in our head of things are very thumbnail image, a very loose thumbnail image of things. But if I can get together with other people and we all share our thumbnail resolution image, it adds resolution to each other. Maybe when we blow that up, we have better resolution. It's less pixelated than just one of our thumbnail images together. When we speak, that which we say is data compression already. It's data compression of a thumbnail resolution concept of a real thing that we have in our head. So it's like at least 2 levels of data compression, because the concept in our head is already data compression. And then the propositions that come out of our mouth to describe the concept that's in our head is even compressed further, because words can only capture so much. So when we go back to people broadcasting and sharing their perspective, you have to understand that what you're trying to do, and this is very important. I'm so glad that I remembered to say this. What you're trying to do is you're trying to hear and perceive the thing that's trying to be said, despite the person's inability to say it properly. That's what you're trying to do. And you're trying to work together to help that. So when Private Schmedlack talks about the airplane wing, you are, the thing that's wanting to be said is a satellite dish. That's what's wanting to be said, but it's coming through Private Schmedlack as an airplane wing. Because of his perspective, he only had a little bit of spot to see, because of his presuppositions and his deduction that he performed, which he didn't realize that he did, and because of his inability to articulate well, what was a satellite dish came out as an airplane wing. And we need to listen to people, and we don't want to like, well, you said airplane wing and I'm holding you to it. You can't just change your mind now, agree that it's a satellite dish. And you see husbands and wives do that stuff to each other all the time. They're holding each other accountable for what they said, like in an enmity kind of way. Like in a in a bad way. I know when I talk to my wife, a lot of what we say is theoretical, like we're thinking out loud. I'm not trying to emit to you absolute truth with a high degree of certainty. I'm letting myself think freely out loud to you. And if my wife was constantly, if everything that I said, if she was constantly trying to hold me accountable for exactly every little thing that I said, guess what would happen? I'd stop talking to her. Okay? But that's not what she does. What she tries to do is she tries to listen to the base, the logos of the thought that's trying to be said through me. She's trying to listen for that despite what I say. And then she works with me. She gives me a little feedback, and I'm like, oh, that's not quite what I was thinking. Then I try again. Then she tries again. And as we work together, we come to a common understanding of something that's a lot higher resolution and much better articulated. And so we have to work together to do that. If she's in a rivalrous fashion, in rivalry, we can't be rivalrous. If she's in a rivalrous fashion, constantly trying to hold me accountable so she can tell me how wrong I am, it's not going to be enjoyable. We're not going to ascertain any truth. We're not going to be able to extract satellite dish out of airplane wing, and I'm not going to want to talk anymore. I'm not going to want to say anything. So we want to keep saying things. We want people to keep saying things. Now, because of this, now think about, now with everyone working together, think about how difficult it is to get satellite dish out of airplane wing. You see, that's difficult. It takes teamwork. It takes effort. It takes skill, processing, cognitive ability, epistemic skill. It takes discernment. And experience. It takes some participatory knowing. It takes some perspectival knowing. It takes some procedural knowing, and knowing when to swap back and forth between the different kinds of knowing. That kind of wisdom. It takes wisdom to be able to work with people who aren't articulating things very well, and to extract truth out of it, which can be done. So maybe when somebody says something, it sounds like error. Maybe when we're finished processing it, it's not really error at all, but the seed of of a truth we were able to later generate. So the recon soldier coming back and talking about an airplane wing was a seed that turned into a correct proposition later because of an insightful process that we applied to it. So what may in your mind be an error may actually be a seed of a greater truth. You see? So now there's a lot more signal, and signal doesn't mean everything is automatically true as it's said. It means it's useful for somehow, in some way. It's useful somehow. So when you realize that, there's actually a lot more signal in the broadcast than you thought there was. And when you apply proper processing, you can, if you know, for example, if you know somebody is lying and their motivation for lying, you can apply proper processing to it and actually determine what the truth was based on the lie that they told. So, what does that take us to? Take all this, and I'm going to write this big word down here, and this is the enemy of this process. Rivalry. Here's what happens a lot in theology today. You have a rivalry. You have the church of the shipmast, and you have the church of the airplane wing. And people separate, and they have high degrees of certainty that is not epistemically warranted for the shipmast and the airplane wing. And they form their in-groups based on whether or not you agree it's a shipmast or an airplane wing. And then you have debates, and people debate, and they give all their reasons for why it's a shipmast, and then they give all their reasons for why it's an airplane wing, and they're both wrong. And rivalry keeps you wrong for a variety of reasons. When you're wrong in a debate, or even if you're right, but a lot of people think you're wrong, it can still be anxiety-inducing and embarrassing and all this other kind of stuff. in a rivalrous situation, a lot of people aren't confrontational, so they're not going to share their perspective. You're not going to get the perspective sharing, and you're not going to get the processing of the data, which turns an airplane wing perspective into a satellite dish. You're not going to get the processing and data that allows you to do that. You're not going to get the broadcast in the first place because not nobody, but many people don't want to be in a rivalrous situation. Well, they should be. They just stand up for Christ and all that but look, they're people, and they're just not going to be. Okay? So we definitely need a non-rivalrous place where people can share their seed thoughts that we can use and process to extract truth and insight from it. So getting a satellite dish from a report of an airplane wing is an example of how you can extract a truth out of what seemed like error at first. And then once it's processed, now everybody is walking away with a stronger optimal grip, a more optimal grip than they had before on their own perspective of reality, because they participated in a process which gave better propositions. Now you notice how we're starting to go between all the 4 different kinds of knowing when we talk about that. So we do not want a rivalrous situation when we're dealing with information exchange. We want to get rid of that. So how can you tell, when we're doing the Ephesians 4:16 model, not everybody can do that. And I don't mean not everybody has the ability to do it. I mean, you need to have a high barrier of entry into that group. And the barrier of entry needs to be process-based, not proposition-based. So when it comes to rivalry, what the statement of faith is at your church, you know what that is? That is an attempt to get rid of all disagreement and all non-congruent reports. That's what the statement of faith is, right? But the statement of faith doesn't have any insights in it, doesn't, that kind of stuff. We don't need to get rid of non-congruent perspectives. We need the non-congruent perspectives so that we can process them and get greater truths out of them. Statement of faith is also a very arrogant thing to have because it presumes that a person or group of people you're able to propositionally, and highly articulately at a non-thumbnail resolution state what the absolute truth is that we should all believe. And we need to be multi-perspectival and understand that as we come across new truths and new insights, we may need to not be fully committed, not have a high degree of certainty. So this brings up certainty. You don't want to have a degree of certainty that is higher than what is epistemically warranted. And I'm going to write that down. Epistemically warranted. So how can you tell? What we've been talking about is kind of like rule omega. When I talked about having a psychologically safe place where people can speak inarticulately and you try to hear the thing that's trying to be said through them, that's rule omega. That's an example of rule omega. And not everybody can be afforded rule omega. You can't demand rule omega of somebody else, because then it can be weaponized and used against them. And anything that's a virtue can be weaponized and used against people. So you want to be in an environment where people aren't taking the good quality things that we're doing to ascertain truth and weaponizing them and using them in a rivalrous fashion that they're not confessing to being in a rivalrous fashion. They're there to try to persuade and convince of their certain paradigm. Now, how do you know when it's time for somebody to not participate in this mesh topology process of ascertaining truth, participating in the Ephesians 4:16 model? It's when they are pre-committed to a paradigm. That kind of person has no perspective to share. They're doing what's called simulated thinking. All right? So a Calvinist, for example, when a Calvinist encounters information, he's not going to tell you what his actual perspective is, because in order to be a Calvinist, you've already defected on your own sense making and your own perspective in order to normalize with an in-group within Calvinism. Otherwise, you wouldn't be a Calvinist. And when you know that epistemically, that's what people do to become parts of in-groups. What that does is it compromises their perspective so that it loses its value. So Calvinism is a perspective, and maybe Calvinism itself as a paradigm we can look at that broadcast as a whole and see if it has any signal in it, and that's fine. But any person acting as an avatar of Calvinism is not going to give you anything that deviates from the paradigm. So you don't need to consider individuals who are committed to the paradigm, you just consider the paradigm. And the individual's perspective only becomes valuable again when they stop becoming committed to the paradigm. So what they do is, it's simulated thinking. They perceive something, and their actual perspective is one thing, but they interpret what they see in accordance with the paradigm, and their report is strategically laced with paradigmatic thinking. So they're not giving you a true untainted perspective. They are giving you a paradigmatically tainted perspective, which makes it very much less valuable. Now, it's still useful in one way. If you know that the person's a Calvinist, you can reverse engineer what they're saying back through the Calvinist paradigm and then try to ascertain what it was their original perspective was or would have been. But that's almost impossible to tell, because everybody who becomes a Calvinist is leaving behind they're defecting on their own sense making, and they're to normalize with the Calvinist in-group. Now, what's valuable to the process is their own sense-making and their own perspective. And if they have defected on their perspective and on their sense-making in order to normalize with an in-group, then they no longer have what would be useful to us. And what would be useful to us is their actual untainted individual perspective. So what Christian training should be doing is not trying to train people in accordance with a paradigm, but trying to train people to separate from all paradigms, that's repentance, so that they have a genuine, untainted perspective that they can submit to the edification, to the Ephesians 4:16 edification process, and so that they can grow in discernment, if Hebrews 5. They grow in discernment. So paradigm is telling you what to think and what's good and what's bad. And you cannot become wise until you graduate from the paradigm. You have to leave the paradigm behind, and you need to have a more of an Ecclesiastes 3:1-9 type of wisdom rather than a formulaic paradigm telling you what to do. Okay? So if you have a person who is not pre-committed to a paradigm, or prematurely committed to a paradigm because they don't have, then, and they are aiming at the Ecclesiastes 3 kind of life wisdom, and they are really have a mind that is open to whatever it is that might be true, instead of closing it off with a paradigm which pre-concludes what is true and false. That is the kind of person that can participate in this. So if you see a person who, because of their pre-commitment, I'm circling this again, because of their pre-commitment to a paradigm, they have a high degree of certainty about the things that are saying that is not epistemically warranted. That is the kind of person that can't contribute meaningful, is not going to have much to contribute. There's going to be so much noise in what they say that it's almost, the juice isn't worth the squeeze, if you will. Okay? So a whole person who can contribute in the Ephesians 4:16 model and help you in the process of discernment and getting a broadcast, separating truth from noise, it's a person who is not pre-committed to a paradigm, okay, but is pre-committed to a process of processing data and not being afraid of where the data might lead, and they're committed to the process of separating from their presuppositions and becoming better at the skill of articulating what their perspective is and being honest about what their perspective is and not coloring it in terms of a paradigm to which they would like to persuade everyone else is the true way of thinking. All right. Now, if somebody comes and they're trying to persuade everyone else, this is the way that you must think. What they're really trying to do is they're trying to erase all the other perspectives. And you have to realize all those other perspectives out there, they have insights in them and they have truth in them and they have some errors that are seeds of truths that through the process of edification we can extract out of those seeds, that those good nutrients that will edify us. We can get the satellite dish out of a report about an airplane wing if we process it properly. And in the more broadcasts you have, the more truths and insights that are available to you out of life in general and out of whatever you're looking at, such as studying the Word of God together. And what a paradigm does is it shuts all that down in exchange for just one perspective, you see? And now I lose all that. I lose the Ephesians 4:16 edification model by having a group of people that is all committed to a set of conclusions rather than being committed to a process which generates better conclusions. So we're committed to the process, not the conclusions. Just like science. Science is not a collection of facts and data. It is a process of ascertaining facts and data through observation. And that's what we want when we're interacting with each other. I'm trying to think if there's anything else burning that I just need to say. All right. And I don't know that there is. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button on the video, hit the subscribe button on the video, hit the bell icon, and make a comment. So subscribers are good, and I appreciate we've crossed over 9,000 subscribers. That's good. I really appreciate that. Let me come up here and do it this way. We have 9,000 subscribers. That's good. I really appreciate that. And I've found out that the subscriber thing isn't really what causes videos to rank high, but if you hit the thumbs up button, that causes videos to rank higher and people find them easier. If you hit the bell icon to be notified when we release new videos, that helps the ranking of the videos go up. And if you make a comment, that helps the ranking of the videos to go up. So if you're watching and enjoying, if you can help in one of those three ways, like, bell icon, comment, we really appreciate that. Those of you who support financially, we really appreciate that too. Couldn't do this without you. And yeah, go to the comment section. Let me know what you think about this video. Let me know what your thoughts are. I'm trying to convey a lot of thoughts, a lot of things I've been kind of building up and been wanting to say for months now, and finally got carved out some time to do it. See, my beloved spouse went to a meeting with people, with a bunch of girlfriends, to dinner, so I have this time to film. Now, I'm not trying to blame that on her. But, you know, there's a lot of things. There's really a lot of things that I want to say to you. A lot of videos, a lot of video ideas that I have just waiting for the time to film them. And so it's good to be able to at least knock one of these out. And I look forward to seeing some of you again in the future real soon on our Wednesday night Zoom meetings. And remember to stay tuned on Sunday mornings at 11 a.m. Central Time for our study through the book of Acts. And we're going to try to produce some more of these videos. I got some on Calvinism that I want to do as well. So stay tuned. Pray for us if you can. Support. That's great. Hit the like, bell, subscribe, comment, all that stuff. Thanks for watching. May the Lord bless you, and good day.